Defining Duke, an Xbox podcast, is brought to you by, well, you. If you want to learn how to support the show, go to patreon.com/laststandmedia. Salutations, everybody. It is Maddie here, and welcome to episode 57 of Defining Duke Ultimate, a Defining Duke supplement. Today, we have a very special episode that we're surprising our audience with. We kept this one on the tank for a little bit of time, but now it's time to get into it. First off, my co-host is joining me as always, Lord Cognito, with the N7 shirt, dressed for the occasion.
I figure I come prepared, man.
Yeah.
We have an absolute legend in Ultimate. I love when we do these Ultimate episodes because sometimes we get a little deep dive, behind the scenes, and it's always good to have people who have the experience in the industry, and I'm super excited for this. So let's get into it.
Absolutely. So today we are joined by none other than Mark Darrah, who is a 20-plus year veteran at BioWare. You have exited the studio now, and the main reason I invited you on, Mark, was to talk about a video you posted on your YouTube channel about BioWare Magic. And it really got you and I talking, where I wanted to pick your brain a little bit. But Mark, thank you so much for joining the show here, for taking some time to talk to us.
Yeah, it's great to be here. I'm excited to have this conversation.
Absolutely. So for those who don't know the full Mark Darrah history, they're not familiar with you, I just want to catch people up. Who exactly are you? And then we'll get into our main topic of discussion.
Yeah, so I worked at BioWare from 1997 until early 2021. People probably know me as being the executive producer on the Dragon Age franchise. I led all three of those games at the point when they launched. I also led Anthem when for its last 18 months and helped launch that game as well.
Right on. So you've played a pivotal role. You've been there for a while. You've seen the winds of change blow through this studio time in, time out. I want to just get right into it with this BioWare Magic video. And for those who didn't catch it, can you kind of explain this hockey stick thing that you went through in the video, and kind of give us the too long didn't read on what's happening with BioWare process and what exactly it's called there internally?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't think this is even remotely unique to BioWare, but there is a tendency in development to focus on microscopic efficiency. So you might decide, we're going to just make all of the swords for the entire game all at once, but you haven't even attached a sword to a hand yet. And so what's happening is you're building this backlog of content. You're building just stuff. Everyone's working relatively independently, and nothing's coming together. The game isn't really looking any more done because things are being done in isolation. And then at some point, some critical mass of content gets reached, or it's time to get an E3 demo ready, or money's running out. The game starts to come together, and then that completion tends to build upon itself. And in my video I did earlier about crunch, I talk about completion urgency. Completion urgency being just the sort of desire of the team to get things to completion, as opposed to building up inventory. So what I think has happened at a lot of studios as they've gotten bigger and bigger and bigger is there's been a focus on this micro efficiency. And maybe we've lost sight of, you've got to put it into a game. You've got to make something still. At BioWare, yeah, it's historically been called BioWare Magic. It's been called, don't worry, don't freak out. It's going to come together, because we know that at some point it's all going to start to get better, and then it's going to get better really fast, and then the game is going to be great. And that's an old term. That's a term from like the late 90s.
Right.
But it still has sort of bubbled around within the studio. And I think partially that's because of the way that the leadership works on the projects at BioWare. there's a leapfrogging that happens. So the team that led KOTOR ends up being the team that led Mass Effect 1 and Mass Effect 2 and Mass Effect 3 and Anthem. But meanwhile, between those games, other games are being done with different leadership teams. So culture can have this weird sort of almost like it takes 2 steps forward and then 1 step back as a new leadership team kind of gets into the driver's seat, because basically what ends up happening is the team that is closest to ship, at least for the big games, tends to drive the studio to a large degree. So there are other leadership teams in the background, but they are largely in the background from a culture perspective.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Based on your description, I was going to ask you on that same subject, like in terms of development, kind of like the pockets of isolation that you mentioned, and do you think, is it just because maybe the scope of the studio is so big and you've had this past success, so internally or maybe up top, it's a situation where it's like, look, it's going to come together, because of the. So my question is, do you think you guys were a victim of your past success and were just leaning on that, or the thought from upper management was that?
I think that is certainly true. And I think that's also partially weirdly caused by the leadership teams being somewhat isolated. So, I mean, I was responsible for shipping Dragon Age 2. So that was a big wake up call for me and for leaders on that project. But other people didn't experience that. They were on Mass Effect at the time. And then they shipped Mass Effect 3 and had a different blowback for different reasons, but not for the same kind of development reasons. So they learned different lessons than I learned.
Yeah, and about the ending lesson. Sorry.
Continue. Yeah, that's right. They learned the ending. They learned a lesson about the endings, right. But not necessarily a lesson about the way games come together.
Gotcha. I got to
No, you can keep going, Kai, please.
It's just so fascinating to me, and I love what Mark is saying, and I guess to dig further down on that, would you subscribe to the thought process that maybe, because again, big corporate, big studio, that maybe smaller pockets in development are better as opposed to, again, we know you need manpower for these larger games, but maybe because of the checks and balances, or maybe going up top, and because again, we hear the reports, of things going up top and sometimes get pushed back down. And then, from the ground level, it has to start all over again from a development cycle. Do you think maybe a smaller group, maybe not ideal for big corp, but may be better for game development overall in these cases?
Yeah. So I led Sonic Chronicles at BioWare, which was a team of just barely over 20. And yeah, there's an agility and ability to control and understand what's going on at a team that's that size that just doesn't exist on the larger teams. Something that BioWare has been struggling with is BioWare's had big teams all along. Like back in Baldur's Gate game, these were teams over 100 people at a time when most teams were tiny. So BioWare has processes that have been around for a long time that are actually pretty good at dealing with team sizes between, say, 100 and, say, 200. But what's been happening for a while is those teams have started to get beyond 200. And so what has happened at a lot of other studios, they had processes that worked at 60, but didn't work at 150. And they've had to develop new processes to work at larger sizes. BioWare kind of got to skip that step. They didn't do that. But now they're having to do that because now we're beyond what their processes can handle. You do see some studios that what they've done is they've shrunk down to a very tight core, say 70, 80 people, and then they've got pods outside of that core team that either they're outsourcers or they're independent in some other way. I do think there's an immense amount of power in that, but it does mean that you need to understand your game very clearly before you start this expansion. So it means before you enter production and scale up, that game basically needs to be done in microcosm. You need a tiny version of that game. And that's really not the way that most studios are developing these days.
Very interesting.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you because you made your exit, Mark, from BioWare, at least publicly. We don't know exactly if it was like earlier than that, but the BioWare blog post went live December 3rd, 2020. And I remember that was a shock because it was you, it was Casey Hudson. It was a sign of more turnover at BioWare. And they'd been in the news cycle for a while about just major figures all over, leaving, exiting. Even to this day, I think like Dragon Age 4 lost some top level creator of some kind. I think it was like a director or something. But anyway,
yeah, the creative director recently left.
That's what it was. Yes. Yeah. And so it's been a thing that's kind of followed them around for a while. What I wanted to know on the subject of the video you made about BioWare Magic is, I think I could take a wager, a guess at the reason, but why after all this time did the video end up coming out? Because it was centered around BioWare, and you did speak broadly on like, this isn't just BioWare. But what made you suddenly want to kind of make a rant, if you will, about the hockey stick process of BioWare?
Yeah, I feel like you're expecting a more concrete answer. I don't know. It was just kind of, it's been chewing away at me. And I know that, James Stephanie Sterling, it's one of their go-to things when they're talking process is to go BioWare Magic when talking about BioWare specifically, or just game development in general. Because someone did say that on Anthem. I don't know who, but I do have my suspicions.
Wait, that exact phrase and that exact cadence? I'm just
not
joking.
In that cadence, no.
I wanted to know, like, if that was the theme. It was posterized the office. If you were doing that, like Flair or something. Okay, I just want to make sure. Sorry. Continue.
But so I think it's maybe was just been eating at me for a while. I don't think anything in particular triggered it. And maybe at some point I will realize that something did, but I don't think there actually was anything.
Interesting. So it's been chewing at you for a while. Do you know, was the onset for you like it could have been as early as like Dragon Age 2? Because you mentioned that was like a wake up call.
Yeah. So I mean, for me, I think that's when for me BioWare Magic kind of became a term that I recognized as something that was being used to kind of paper over things that weren't great. That processes that were problematic, which is why I think part of the reason that it was kind of gnawing at me was I kind of felt like this was a term that we had left in the past, that the studio had, we talked this way in the early days, in the Baldur's Gate and Neverwinter and maybe Dragon Age Origin days, but that we had learned our lessons. And I think most people had, but I think there remained enough people in senior enough positions that either hadn't had the experience of shipping as many games, that had been in places where they hadn't shipped for a long time, or had just kept this romantic view of just keep going, just keep driving, it will all come together in the end.
Interesting.
You got more? I got some stuff.
No, please go for it, Kak. Yeah.
I don't know if you want to divert it from Dragons. I had some other questions reference to Anthem, but I don't want to divert yet.
I have questions on his exit, but I think that could be done at a later time, so you can go for it.
No, actually, I was going to touch Anthem if you didn't mind.
Yeah, please.
But like the reason why it's important to me, Mark, like you got to give my background. I'm the looter shooter guy. I'm the Destiny guy, right? So you guys market this game. I see the trailer. I remember E3. I believe it ended one of Microsoft's shows, Xbox shows, because I believe they had the marketing rights for Anthem at the time. And I remember getting the PC demo and jumping off of like Fort Tarsus. And I'm in the air and I'm like, oh boy, Destiny might be in trouble. This might be the famed Destiny killer, because I was just really enraptured of the potential of what Anthem could be, right? And obviously, we heard some reports internally about what was going on in development. But in your opinion, like, what do you feel were some of the major factors that kind of went wrong with Anthem's development? And also, the second part is, why do you think a potential overhaul, which was supposed to happen potentially with Anthem Next, didn't happen?
Yeah, so I mean, I think there's tons of blame to go around for Anthem. Certainly, part of it should fall on me. For a lot of Anthem's development, the team, this is before I was on the project, but for a lot of the team was not really recognizing that it was a looter shooter. Like they weren't. So you have to remember, this is a game that started development before Destiny even came out. Back in the days where Destiny, no one knew what Destiny was, except that they were making it very clear it wasn't an MMO.
Yes, true.
And so I feel that one of the early mistakes that was made is when Destiny came out, or when Borderlands was out there, and there was a reluctance to draw that connection and say, you know, this is BioWare's Destiny, or this is BioWare's Borderlands, or just to draw that connection that gives that clarity. Like honestly, for me, the flying is awesome, and it remains awesome.
Ooh, absolutely.
But the like a lot of it just came together really late. The leadership team had lost its ability to make decisions, or had that ability taken away potentially. So there was just a lot of churning happening and decisions being made and unmade, or being left unmade for a long period of time. But what that means is when I came in, I'm great at making decisions, and in the vacuum, decisions got made. But what that effectively resulted in is I just took the stick and pushed it down. And I'm used to working with a leadership team that pushes back.
Right.
And I think what happened is this leadership team was so desperate, so hungry for decisions to be made, that rather than pushing back on the stick that I'm pushing towards the ground, they're actually pulling it further down. They're like, yes, finally. And instead of sort of landing like instead of me aiming like this and the resistance causing us to land like this, I think what happened is that I'm aiming like this, and they're actually causing us to just go way too fast. Now, it's hard for me to see a path where things are actually way better, because, you know, we knew a lot of things. We went into the Christmas break before it shipped, having not done a complete balance pass through the loot structure. And we did it in this awful hot seat way with QA playing the game 24 hours a day over that break. So we knew that, you know, things were shaky, but the team was tired. And you know, EA wanted it in the fiscal year, and the problem is, so I do see a path where you get a better Anthem, but that path requires the game to basically enter beta around the time when it launched, and then sit in beta for 6 months, say.
Right.
And then launch in August or whatever that would have been. Yeah, I guess August.
Right.
But EA wasn't that company then. I don't know if it's that company now, but it certainly wasn't that company then. It wasn't prepared to put a game out into beta for that long and spend the time. Because I think if we had just spent 6 more months on it, without having gone into beta, I don't know that it would have been better, but it wouldn't have been what it needed to be. I needed to get out into the world and get the pushback. As to why, like, the revamps and stuff.
Yeah, Anthem next.
Yeah. So I don't know, because it's certainly EA has launched things that have fallen on their face. Battlefield 4, the Battlefront 2, that have fallen on their face, and then they've spent the time to fix them.
Yeah.
But in the case of BioWare, that hasn't been the case. That's not what happened with Andromeda. Like, now, maybe it's partially because BioWare is doing multiple things at once. If you're at DICE and you launch Battlefield 4 and it's a problem, well, it's like, well, you better fix it because you got nothing else to do. Whereas with BioWare, it's like, well, you could fix it, but don't you want those resources on Dragon Age or on Anthem or on whatever's coming next? So maybe it's that. I honestly, I thought about this, and I can't. It also could just be too big to fail. Like Battlefield was too big to fail. Anthem wasn't too big to fail. It disappointed, but it wasn't a franchise that needed to continue.
Gotcha. No, I'm glad you explained it. I mean, a lot of what you said makes sense. You know, from a development standpoint, from what's on your plate, and the vision. You know, for me, it always be that you know, what if, that sad story for me, because again, I did see the potential, and I remember coming into that as a Destiny fan, coming into that, you know, launch. The question at the time was, you know, Destiny, Division 2, and Anthem, and which one was kind of see its way out. And I was like, yo, Anthem was the one I was worried about, man. Like that was the one, you know.
It's interesting because Division 2's didn't. I mean, it wasn't Anthem, but it didn't have a great launch either.
Correct.
So it's a hard genre, and honestly, there wasn't a ton of people that there were people that understood the genre as players, but there wasn't a ton of people that understood the genre from a dev perspective.
Fair enough.
You talked a lot about EA, Mark, and it's always fascinated me because, you know, a little background on me, like I'm a lifelong BioWare fan, obsessed, like love everything you guys have done. KOTOR being my favorite game ever made. And so one thing that's always interested me is I kind of call it at times, and I think it's fair from what we as consumers have heard, you know, you've been there through it all, so maybe you can enlighten us more. The EA scapegoat, though, you know, they're famed as the bad partner for BioWare. And now I'm going off of reports here. And again, you'll have more intimate knowledge of this, but I look at stories like Mass Effect Andromeda, which I think had like 5-6 years. I look at Anthem, which reportedly had close to 7. And I'm like, well, is EA that bad of a partner if they're letting them have this much time to figure things out? And I just, you know, not for you to cast them in a bad light, unless you'd like to do that. But, you know, what do you have to say about EA as a partner for BioWare? Because, you know, when they acquired them around the time of, I think it was Mass Effect 3, or I think it was Dragon Age Origins. I might be wrong. But
BioWare was acquired just before Dragon Age Origins shipped.
That's what it was.
Yeah.
Right. So, you know, and people got a little bit worried when you started to see like the day one DLC for Mass Effect 3, the push for microtransactions, et cetera, and that a lot of the blame has been laid at the feet of EA. So do you have anything you'd like to add to that as their, you know, because you've been there when they weren't a partner of BioWare's and when they were. So do you think there's truth in some of the reports that have gone around?
I think there is some truth. I do think it's an easy scapegoat, and I think it's very easy to say, oh, big evil corporation. But you have to remember that, honestly, I mean, BioWare would have probably shut down in 2007 or 2008 if we hadn't been gone. Like, there wasn't the coffers were pretty empty before it got acquired by VG Holdings, or Elevation Partners, the company that ultimately sold BioWare to EA. So like there was no money left. So, you know,
wow,
they kept the company going. So it's hard to be too mad at them. I think that EA doesn't understand what BioWare is.
Okay.
I actually think that EA ultimately understands sports games, and shooters, as it turns out, you can kind of treat a lot like a sports game, and you kind of get away with it. They're quite competitive, and you can kind of get away with it. But if you look at the franchises within EA that are not like sports games, The Sims, BioWare, they've struggled with that. They don't understand, and they've had a lot of trouble. And so when they look at BioWare, what they see, RPGs are expensive. So what they see is these are expensive. They don't sell as well as Battlefield. What's up with that? So, and I think there's always been, so has EA had negative effects on BioWare? Absolutely. But I don't think necessarily in the way that people think. So there's been, so like some of the stuff you've heard about with Dragon Age 4, it's like, it's going to be a live service extravaganza. It's going to be single, like that bouncing back and forth. That's mostly coming from EA. That's the kind of stuff that you're getting from EA. But in terms of second to second, you know, pressure around about what the features of the individual game are, it happens, but that's usually just rogue executive, not actually EA saying, you know, we need this to be more big head turtle racing. That's not really happening. Or if it is happening, a decent executive producer can judo that out of existence. So I do think, yeah. I mean, was there pressure on Inquisition and Andromeda to be on Frostbite? Absolutely. Like that was politically, basically, effectively mandated. So there's been impacts, and honestly, I think maybe since I did the BioWare Magic video, I've been thinking about this. One thing that happened before EA was that BioWare games slipped more, like way more, which is probably why the company was almost out of money. So, games have slipped since EA, but other than SWTOR, games have not slipped years, except for because of massive externalities. So Dragon Age 4 has moved, but because of it basically being restarted. But other than those externalities, things haven't really moved as much. And I think maybe the reason why maybe BioWare Magic maybe worked in the past was because you pivoted eventually, and then you just kept going until it was great. If your date isn't moving, it can't move as much, you've pivoted, and then you run into the date, and that's what it is. And you're done.
Hog, fire away, man. You said you had a question.
Yeah, like Mark's on fire right now. He's got me thinking of a lot of stuff here, and we're talking about scapegoats, and then we're talking about EA sometimes, and sometimes how gamers can misrepresent what's going on internally. But you made some good points. You mentioned Frostbite, and I would be remiss not to ask you because outside. Within gamers, there's this thought process like, that damn Frostbite is a problem and this, that, and the third. And, I just wanted clarity because based on your background, you come from Jade Empire. You went from engines before. I think you went from like Aurora to Unreal at one point.
I worked on Unreal only briefly. So okay. I was on Aurora, I was on Eclipse, which is and then I was on, I did a little bit of work with, I was the stream architect for Mass Effect in the early days, but I didn't really do a lot of dev work on it. And then Frostbite, yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah. So basically, in that line of thinking, as far as now moving forward with now this in-house studio, right? This in-house engine with Frostbite. Was it truly difficult to pivot internally from that, and was that overblown? Do people, or maybe you said to yourself, hey, I was a little bit overblown. It was maybe a little challenging in the beginning, but then we got through it. But hey, no, this was really difficult, and we really were set back because we were forced to use tools that maybe we weren't familiar with, and that affected development with Andromeda. And
so every time you change engines, there's a consequence to that. I do think there's a fetishization of engine use by fans, but also honestly by devs. I think that there is grass is always greener. My feeling is the best engine to use is almost always the engine you just used. So if you just shipped a game on Frostbite, probably you should use Frostbite for the next one because you've built things to ship that game, and so you can build on top of it. Yeah, and now there are extreme circumstances under which maybe that's just not going to go. Eclipse was long in the tooth, and it didn't look very good. And so it's hard to imagine that you could continue going down that road and continue using Eclipse indefinitely. Bethesda has essentially done that with their engine, and and it shows. It shows, but it's let them be incredibly successful. The mistake, honestly, that I think that was made with regard to Frostbite at BioWare, it's again this independence of leadership is. Frostbite or Inquisition was made using Frostbite, and we went in learning the lessons that Mass Effect had learned on Mass 1 from Unreal. Is like respect what the engine is, build on top of what's there, don't try to force the engine to be something else. And a lot of stuff was built, and then Anthem or then Andromeda started in the middle of Inquisition's development, and basically started over again from blank Inquisition, and then that's going on, and then Anthem starts again before Inquisition has shipped, and starts effectively again from a blank sheet of paper. So for me, for BioWare, the problem wasn't Frostbite. The problem was never Frostbite. The problem was we went through the pain of adopting an engine 3 times when we should have done it once.
Gotcha.
Fair.
Very
Yeah,
fair.
is there on that note there, because I think that's kind of a flipping it on its head moment, because I remember a report coming out saying that, and I always found this interesting because it's such a small note, but when Dragon Age Inquisition came out, it's probably the game from BioWare I'm surprisingly most critical of, and it scored very well. And there were reports saying that there was almost a disappointment because this meant more Frostbite development. Can you confirm or deny if this was an actual company sentiment?
I'm sure that there was somebody there on the team that really wanted to be on Unreal, but I didn't feel that from the team as a whole.
Right.
I didn't feel that the team was what I actually think is what I would have wanted to see in a world where resources were unbounded would have been a fast follow of Inquisition, something that came out in 18 to 24 months, built not just on Frostbite, built on the Inquisition tech base. I think there was an opportunity there. We pitched all kinds of stuff inside of Frostbite in early Joplin, like making the tools available to the public. It'll be interesting because I actually will interested to see what happens. Yeah, like modding. Well, kind of like what happened with Dragon Age Origins and with Neverwinter, where you actually have the tools are available for building modules and things like that. There was no appetite for that within EA at the time. Interestingly enough, there right before I left, there seemed like there was growing appetite, but now with the latest news on Battlefield, I'm actually wondering if they won't ceremoniously take Frostbite out behind a woodshed and shoot it in the head. I'm not sure. Because they're definitely laying blame on Frostbite in the case of Battlefield, which, I mean, of all of the franchises where I feel like that is undeserved, it would be Battlefield.
Can you elaborate more?
Well, because most of Frostbite development is done in Stockholm by people, like by DICE people, and it's largely been used. Historically, it has used Battlefield as its lead product. Now, since the sports titles have moved on to Frostbite, that's changed a lot. So maybe that's actually the reality. Is pre FIFA being on Battlefield, Frostbite was a Battlefield engine. It was the engine built to build Battlefield.
Yes.
Post FIFA integration, I imagine FIFA drives that relationship a lot more. So maybe they just weren't used to not being in complete control of their engine as a studio. And so maybe it is to blame for that reason, because they're used to having almost 100% control of everything, and now they had only 40% control. I don't know.
Yeah, do they use this engine specifically because of like licensing cuts? Because I know, for example, like Unreal Engine, you have to give a certain cut, and they've minimized that cut over the years. But do you think it's a strict business decision to get like everyone across the EA family on this engine that seems to be kind of problematic?
I'm sure that was a factor in it. There was a lot of politics in it. It was Patrick Soderlund's engine when he ran DICE, and so he was in a very senior position and he could push for it. I think that EA still remembers forcing renderware down everyone's throat and that blowing up in their face. So I think that they are reluctant to mandate it simply to save a few bucks. I do think that at the time, like when Inquisition, I can't remember if it was me or if it was Aaron Flynn, but when we were working on Inquisition, basically at the time, I would have described Unreal, it was like a NASCAR. It's a good fast car. You can go in a race, and I just would have at the time described Frostbite as an F1 car, way faster, but it's way harder to drive.
Yeah.
And if you don't know what you're doing, if you get in a NASCAR and you don't know what you're doing, you can probably not kill yourself. If you get an F1 car and you don't know what you're
Oh
doing,
boy.
I think you're going to plow that thing into a brick wall in the first 3 seconds, and you're going to die. And that's what you've seen happen with Frostbite in that sort of time period back in the 2012, 13, 14, 15 timeframe, where teams that approached the engine with respect did well. Teams that didn't, they plowed their car into a brick wall at 300 miles an hour. However, since then, Unreal has effectively a development team of 10,000 people, because of the giant community that uses it. And Frostbite at generously is 1,000. So I don't know that analogy still holds. I don't know that you can say anymore that Frostbite is the graphically superior engine to Unreal. I don't think it is anymore. So back in 2014, 2012, you could say, okay, yeah, it makes sense to use Frostbite. We can get a better looking game using Frostbite than we can get using Unreal. I question that is still the case.
He's firing the synapses again. Like he's on fire, Mark. Like I think what it is, a lot of stuff that I'm hearing too. You mentioned, from up top, and I'm thinking budget, and I'm thinking resources. I'm thinking, okay, if you use an in-house engine, the reality is up top you save money as opposed to licensing out. And then as far as, and then you got me back to thinking about what you said about Anthem in reference to the fiscal quarter. And I remember also a decision, even though you weren't involved with this, but with my beloved Titanfall 2 and the release cadence and when that came out. And again, I know we going down the scapegoat thing, but I just, for me, I struggle because I'm like, man, like I just feel up top maybe some poor decisions were made that may have affected you guys. That's just me from the outside looking at it. That's just my assessment, and do you feel that way, what I mean, in regards to up top and those type of decisions that sometimes are guided by finance?
Well, yeah, I mean, absolutely. In its very core, EA is a publicly traded company. I haven't worked in a senior level at other publicly traded companies, but it is very visible. It is difficult to move a game between fiscal quarters. It is virtually impossible to move a game between fiscal years, because of just like that is the way that the company. I'm not going to say it's run by its CFO, but sometimes it feels like it's run by its CFO.
Interesting.
I
wanted to ask you about the exit in particular when you had left at the end of 2020. To me, as a long-standing BioWare fan, Mark, like your pedigree is incredible, and you stand shoulder to shoulder with some of the gaming greats in my eyes. And when you left and Casey Hudson left, who had he'd been in and out, and I'm an Edmonton Oilers fan, so like, look, I just it's something with just teams in Edmonton that have this turnover. Like they've had 11 coaches in 9 years, so it's like, what I want to know is, was there any conversation between you and Casey at the time of exiting? Because this was legit huge news. Two long-standing BioWare vets had left at the same exact time, and again, they had a new GM now. Gary McKay, I believe, has stepped in. Yeah. I think Aaron Flynn was the GM for a while. I mean, there's just been a lot of leadership changes over at BioWare. And I just want to know if there was a conversation between maybe you and Casey or anyone internally before you had made your exit. Because on that note, I guess, externally as a fan of your game, starting with, I would say, Inquisition, you started to note a little bit of change in design philosophy. And I'm wondering if that started to leak into the development side where it's like, this isn't really what we've been here for a while.
Yeah, it's funny because Casey and I did not coordinate our departures. Well, certainly I didn't coordinate with Casey. Casey resigned the day after I did. So it is possible that I triggered him to resign. I don't believe that's what happened. There are things, there was timing for other financial things that sort of lined up for both me and him that I suspect was probably a trigger for both of us. But we were not coordinated in this. But yeah, I mean, it is it was frustrating, and was it getting more frustrating? I don't know that it was, for me at least, because we were getting into the period where Dragon Age was going to be in the primary driving position for BioWare. So I don't think that anything corporate changed in November, early December of 2020 that triggered me. Casey would have been in conversations that I wasn't in, so it's possible that there was a trigger for him that I'm not aware of.
Right on.
This is good stuff, man. And Mark, I mean, I gotta ask you a difficult question, and I gotta check my fandom at the door with this one. But I have to ask you because it's like, look, as a hardcore fan of you guys, I think you guys are legends. You, Casey, Drew and the team, the OGs, that we love BioWare. We have this I would say sometimes maybe an over romanticizing sometimes with the good old days, but because that's how much we love these games. It just Maddie's like, yeah, me, right? And that's how much we love it. So it's like, my question to you, the difficult one, is just like how you mentioned BioWare Magic and how that may be overblown and hogwash. Do you think the idea of the classic BioWare, the spirit, is that also gone, in your opinion?
I don't think so. I think that actually the thing that makes a BioWare game, for me at least, the thing that makes a BioWare game special is the characters, the followers specifically.
Yep.
And so I mean, obviously, when you look at Anthem through that lens, you can see a kind of glaring problem: is you have characters, but they're not followers. They're not as present as they are in other games. But the funny thing is, we never said that out loud until pretty much 2019. In the post Anthem world was when I think people started to really say out loud, like, it's about the characters, stupid. It's not. I mean, I think we've had conversations in the past where it's like, BioWare tells its stories through characters. Like, we've had this conversation. There's been a knowledge, but I don't know if there's been an acknowledgement of, say the thing that's most important out loud and make sure that you're respecting that. I think that maybe there was a almost
trepidation.
No, almost like we were too confident in it, and we just and we're like, we don't need this, because we can set it aside. We can have characters that are just in your base. We don't need followers. And I think it took us saying it out loud to really acknowledge that. And I think that is still true. And I think that there's still a pedigree at BioWare that can execute on excellent characters. I think the reality is if you look at the story of, frankly, any BioWare game, they're not amazing. The story on their own isn't amazing. What makes them amazing is that you're experiencing it through other characters that let you that elevate the story overall. And of course, that's how it always has been, and it's how it always should be.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good.
I was thinking of Dragon Age 4, and when you had left, you had said it was in good hands, and you effectively mentioned it had restarted because the reports had said, like, and you even said yourself, like, this is effectively going to be a live service game. And now I'm imagining that this is heading more towards that traditional BioWare game, like you said, driven by the characters well and truly. But the most recent report, and I'm asking you this from the outside looking in, was that Dragon Age 4 is in good shape, but they're saying it's got 18 months at least to go. And what I'm asking you when it comes to this is, do you buy into that as someone who's effectively seen the game? And I know I'm making a game myself. Like, a lot can fucking change in 18 months, So how do you feel about a game reportedly from BioWare being in good shape this early, if you will, in the process? I guess late if you look at how many times it's restarted, but you get what I'm getting at.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't know where that measurement is coming from, but certainly it being 18 months, like, that makes sense. Timeline, that makes perfect sense to me. They would have needed to to adapt, and even like when I was still there, we were probably headed towards well, maybe not, yeah, probably 20, we were probably headed towards 2023 even then. So I think that it's very plausible to me, and I think that if they've been able to increase their completion urgency and bring things to further phases earlier, they could be in really good shape.
Right.
There was stuff getting there when I was still there a year ago, and if they were able to be stable enough to keep that stuff, then they probably have a really good foundation to build upon. And I would think that they probably were able to keep the things that were nearing completion when I left. So, I mean, they probably have, for 18 months out, they probably have things. So I'm trying to say this correctly. Not that they have more things than another BioWare game would have had 18 months out, because that's actually the problem, is just tons of things. They have more done 18 months out than any other BioWare title probably has ever had. So a tighter core, maybe not as much stuff yet, but if a tighter core, but that will let them go faster when they're going. Like if they've taken the hockey stick and they've pulled this part up, and I think they have, then I think it should put them in significantly better shape going forward.
Now, on that note, of putting them in good shape going forward, what I personally been told, again, I never call this a report or a scoop or anything like that, because it's just a sentiment. But the sentiment that had been shared with me is like sort of like, we need to nail this, not like a desperation, like we're done if we don't, but like we want this high score, like we want to remind people why they love BioWare games. But on that speculative note, I want to know if do you view this as a do or die moment? Because EA has had no issue shuttering. I remember one of my favorite studios, Pandemic, Visceral, even though now they're bringing Dead Space back a couple of years later and giving it to Motive. Like, they have no issue closing down studios. BioWare has stumbled, at least from the outside looking in. I don't know the financials of it, but like with Andromeda, Anthem, where a lot of people are kind of viewing Dragon Age 4 as this, make or break, like not just reputation wise, but studio survival wise. As someone who's there on the offset of this project, you're there right in the beginning. Was that the vibe inside?
I mean, I think they're not in the early days, because early days would be, pre Andromeda and Anthem.
True.
But I think in a post Anthem world, I think Andromeda was, you could weather that. But Andromeda and Anthem together, yeah, I think there is some truth to that. Now, would EA shut down BioWare? I don't know. As you say, they've done it before. Also, studios have become effectively in-source houses for other studios, and so there are fates that are almost as bad as being shuttered. So. Is it actually do or die? Honestly, I think the reputation matters more than EA, because if people give up on BioWare externally, why would EA keep them around? If everyone just decides that BioWare is a bunch of hacks doing garbage, then why would EA bother? I think like one of the things that has kept EA kind of interested in BioWare is kind of like the subarm of a movie studio that makes the Oscar bait, and so maybe that excuses, for some people, it's like, well, yeah, your games cost more and they sell less than a Battlefield, but Battlefield was never going to win Game of the Year. Even if they made a perfect Battlefield, it's probably never winning a Game of the Year, just by nature of the way, the disrespect that certain genres kind of get.
I am so glad you said that because I've been fighting on that hill for the longest. Thank you so much.
Yeah. No, but it's true. Like COD's never going to win Game of the Year either for the same reason. It doesn't matter. It's always going to be somewhere between. Well, like it doesn't matter. You can make a perfect Marvel movie. It's never winning. It's probably never winning Best Picture.
Preach.
And
sad realities.
Yeah. So I do think that if BioWare is making quality that is respected and making people excited, that gives it leeway within EA that another studio that's making things that may sell better may not get. So I do think that this needs to be a good game, and I actually think EA knows that too. Sure. And I think EA recognizes that, you know, they deserve some of the blame for Anthem, and some of them for Andromeda, less, but some of it.
Okay.
And I think, and so I think that when they look at that and they look at Jedi Fallen Order, a game that honestly doesn't make a lot of sense within EA, that exists in part because they kind of brought in a studio that made it. Like, it's not the kind of game that EA would typically have greenlit. But when they see it and it did well, that, you know, they're not stupid.
Wow. I just have, I do have a couple more questions, but I do have one more on the note of Dragon Age, and then Cog, I do want to pass it to you because I'm sorry I've been monopolizing.
No, this is great. This is great.
When you had left, I always got asked this stuff because I don't know anything about it. When you had left and you put out your exit letter, you had mentioned like Dragon Age will be in good hands. Christian Daly is, you know, moving to executive producer role, et cetera, et cetera. I guess what I want to ask you, Mark, is how much, I put this in quotes, corporate speak is there in a write-up like this? Do you feel this way? Are you told like, you know, ushering confidence into this thing on your exit so it doesn't look bad? Is this a note that's vetted all the way through? What's kind of the process like on that?
So most public things, like if it's on the website, it's gone through somebody. For like there's legal and so it's gone through somebody to approve a message. One of my frustrations in EA is just how I was effectively like second community manager for Anthem because they weren't willing to tell me no. And so I was able to basically put out messages that wouldn't have survived the process. But I mean, they didn't pay me anything to say nice things. I didn't get paid anything on my way out to be nice. Right. So I do actually believe that the core of Dragon Age remains strong, that there are definitely people there that know how to make a great game, and there are people there that know what the IP is. Good. And I think that they are well positioned to do that.
Awesome. That's great to hear. Cog, please.
Yeah,
I've talked long enough.
Nah, you good. These were great. Those are great questions, brother. And Mark's been on fire. I think for me, I just wanted to personalize it with the moments. And during your tenure at BioWare, like, what would you say were like, whether it be a specific game or development process that you were like, okay, man, this is golden. This is great. I'm feeling this. And then in contrast, also, what was the moment where you're like, you know what? That's it for me. I'm kind of done.
So, I mean, from just a pure enjoyment of the process perspective, Sonic is the favorite thing I've ever worked on.
Really?
Yeah.
Really, Sonic.
Sega? I'm a Sega kid. Continue.
Wow.
Because it's small team, like tight constraints. There's just, if I would describe what it was like to lead, leading a project of 200 people, it's not even like you're the captain of a cruise liner. It's like you're the person in the other room that tells the captain of the cruise liner how to drive the ship. With a small team, you're driving a speedboat. You just have it, like everything is at your fingertips and you can just drive, and it's just, there's almost an effortlessness to it. Not that, Sonic is not at the end of the day, it's a fine game, but it's not an amazing game. Honestly, I think the game that I'm most proud of is Dragon Age Inquisition. It's certainly not perfect, but I know Maddie has his.
Maddie gets it. No, I like it. I'm just telling you.
I don't hate it, Mark. I don't hate it, Mark.
You bloviate because that's the one. I understand where he's coming from as a classic Dragon Age guy. I get you though, man. I do understand. We having fun, but for
like
me,
all of them. Don't worry.
True, you do.
No,
you
but
do.
and honestly, and
like
certainly it is the victim of the moment in time where open world was briefly taking over the universe, and so it's bigger than it needs to be by somewhere between 20 and 50%.
That's really my main critique. So there you go. So we're eye to eye here. That's great.
Yeah. No, Maddie, you did say that.
No, but it's the closest to. I think it's the closest game that I've led that it was the closest that came to what we were trying to make. But I mean, honestly, I'm really proud of Dragon Age 2 as well, because that is a project that was done under incredibly difficult circumstances, and the team was just very aligned the whole way through.
Yeah, that game doesn't get enough credit, in my opinion. On just a side note.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that there is a the perception of a game in its first week can very much make or break a game forever. And I think that's I think Dragon Age 2, in large part, I think because that it's the fact that it's called Dragon Age 2 and people therefore expected it's Dragon Age Origins 2, which it certainly is not, just meant that there was a cloud over it in the early days. It's become the BioWare game that is most fashionable to love. The second one being Andromeda, actually. So now Andromeda, I think, actually had problems. Like Dragon Age 2 is sort of, it's flawed because of the speed at which it was made. So it's still basically the same game as it was on the day that it launched. Andromeda was flawed because things escaped, like bugs escaped, and things that should have been caught weren't caught. And so it's a better game now than it was at launch. So Dragon Age 2 has sort of recovered from the initial knee-jerk reaction. Andromeda has actually repaired itself into a better game.
And the question, damn, you got me thinking about Andromeda. I don't want to over question you, but do you think that there's a reason why Andromeda wasn't part of the eventual remastering, like how the trilogy was? And then the second question I never got was the moment where you felt, that's it, I'm done.
So I don't think there was a reason that Andromeda was excluded. I mean, the easy answer would be it's on Frostbite, the others are on Unreal. So to include it means just from a logistics perspective, it is a thing. It's just a lot of extra work.
Makes sense.
I mean, honestly, it still looks fine. So it's not in as desperate of a need for the remaster either. And I guess it's not on current generation, but it's on last generation. So, it's the same thing with Inquisition. Like if you were going to do an Inquisition remaster, you could go in and tweak a little bit of the, like, how much power you get or how much power you need to do things. But otherwise, you pretty much could get away with update the DirectX version, crank the sliders all the way up, and call it a day, because it still looks pretty decent. In terms of what, like, something that made me say, no, it's enough, it's over. There are good days and bad days. There are good days and bad days. I don't know that there was any particular project that made me say, no, enough, I'm done. Anthem is not the high point of my career, both as a leader and also in terms of the product that came out the other side. But I don't feel like there was like a moment of, no, we're done.
Okay, fair enough.
I really just have two questions left. The first one is just a personal one, Mark, that I've been dying to know, because Dragon Age to me is such a fascinating series, because I feel like each game had its own different design philosophy, and now in hindsight I think I appreciate it much more for that. where, you know, Origins is this very strategy driven game, 2 is a good action game, and then Inquisition's more like a hybrid with open world elements. Like, they're all just fascinating. But what I really have always been interested in knowing, as someone who's been quite intimate with the series, is why the focus on action? Because Origin starts off as this strong tactical game. In my eyes, rather, it was like an evolution of Knights of the Old Republic's combat system, which I thought, this is my favorite game of all time. If I could critique anything about the game, like, it's probably the combat. And then Origins just rights the wrong on it across the board. So, as someone who you were really close with Dragon Age 2, what was the decision behind stepping away from the setup tactical combat for something more action oriented? Was it accessibility? Was it marketability? Was it just, this makes more sense, this is what we always wanted? What was the mindset behind that?
It's mostly marketability. There's definitely I haven't done my memories and lessons on Dragon Age 2 yet, but so the marketing campaign for Dragon Age 2 was supposed to be, it was called Treehouse and Frat House. So it was like, we're gonna make sure the game is appealing to the people that love Dragon Age Origins. That's the Treehouse, and then we're also gonna make this thing that's awesome and exploding. But the problem is, what ended up happening in practice is that the marketing kind of forgot the Treehouse completely and didn't market to them at all, and only did the Frat House marketing, and only made this sort of thing of like, brah, bro, you can totally bro. And then what happened is it's essentially a victim of confirmation bias, because the marketing said, this is not Dragon Age Origins. This is a heavy metal guitar riff of a game. And then when you played it and it's more actiony, you just went, yep, it's exactly what I was worried it was going to be. And you basically discounted it. Now, there is EA and everything mixed into there. Like, there's been there's a love-hate relationship with the term RPG. I think we've grown past this as an industry, but also as BioWare has as well. I think is RPG is seen as inaccessible, is seen as something that only a very small group of people are willing to play. So there's been an attempt to say, like, this is the kind of game that anyone could enjoy, to try to reach a branch out to other people. I mean, it's interesting because if you look at what an RPG was in 1999, that's pretty inaccessible. Origins is a lot more accessible than Baldur's Gate 1 is. But that trend has continued. So, I mean, accessibility does matter, because RPGs are expensive, and they've gotten more expensive. So you want to make something that can appeal to as broad of a group as is possible. So, or alternatively, you need to decide that you're making a game for a smaller group of people and scope and budget accordingly. So that would be the other option, would have been to the other sort of universe path for Dragon Age Origins would have been, let's stay in the lane of effectively turn-based or pause and play tactical RPGs, except that the games sell 4 to 7 million copies, 7 on the very upper end, and budget accordingly. But that wasn't that's where EA has an influence. Because if you offer EA those two options, they're definitely going to say, you want to go for 10 million. And honestly, I think one of the things that's hurt Dragon Age has been, it's never been allowed to just be what it is. It's always been it's much more than Mass Effect has been subject to, but could you be more? Could you be more accessible? Could you be bigger? Right. Even though Inquisition is the best-selling BioWare game of all time, and before that, I'm pretty sure it was Origins. It much more than Mass Effect has been subject to that. I think because Mass Effect has a cultural impact that because of N7 that Dragon Age simply doesn't have. Like that kind of like it's got genius branding.
Yes, definitely.
Definitely.
My personal last question, Cog, of course, if you have any more
Sure.
afterwards, fire away. But just, returning kind of to the roots of this conversation with BioWare Magic, one of the reasons I invited you in, Mark, is to ask you, what can we do as an industry to be better? How do you improve those bad processes? Because you mentioned it's not exclusive to BioWare, that a lot of companies have this similar, if you will, hockey stick mentality or process, I should say. So what can the industry do better to, instead of making a bunch of little things here and there, like have it all come together a bit quicker, kind of like how you mentioned they raised the stick a little bit, maybe with Dragon Age 4. How can you repeat that across a number of studios?
So I do think that figuring out a way to imbue completion urgency into the team through some manner, through whether that be maybe develop like Baldur's Gate 3 is being developed a little bit out loud in the public, that will help because things need to reach a completion state earlier. I do think that there are ways that I struggle to find, but exist to just raise that desire to get things done sooner. I do think as well a willingness to set aside microscopic efficiency of this will let this person make these widgets faster and focusing more on the game moving forward as opposed to the parts of the game moving forward. I actually wonder if as the labor movement struggles to find its feet, that's going to have an impact. If we end up with something that looks like the movie industry, that that's going to force a very different thought process towards development because teams are going to come together and dissolve. Like if we end up like movies, and I don't know that we will, but if we end up like movies, you end up with a thing where teams come together and dissolve and core teams are more steady. But if that's the reality, that core team is going to need to be able to deliver something that is complete but small, and then you will build upon that. And I actually think that's probably the core of the solution is build a more complete core and then layer on that, because you can effectively spray money at a very, very good core gameplay loop that understands itself and make a big game. If you have something that's very spread out and it hasn't coalesced and it hasn't figured itself out yet, then spraying money at it has a real high chance of just slowing it down even further.
Right on.
Those are premium bars right there. Yeah. I mean, I just think about the different things that we hear, and I love how you break that down in reference development, getting that core essence, that understanding what you are kind of first, making sure you get that deliverable, and then maybe you can pour money on everything else and spread out after the fact. And I that definitely resonates with me. What I wanted, my final question for you, just on a personal level. I know you got old game dev advice, channel out here. You're doing your thing. You're educating a lot of people. I guess my question for you is, what does the future hold? And also, would you ever get tempted? Let's just say the band got back together, and let's say, I'm just joking, Casey made a call or someone made a call and was like, hey, we want to do this our way. We've got this thing going on. Mark, the legend, we would love you to be a part of it. Could you be tempted out of your situation?
So, I mean, I suspect there are other games left in me. I don't know that I see myself at a AAA studio again. Now, there are a lot of things between I'm making a game by myself in my house and AAA. So, is there a world where I'm leading a team? There might be. Certainly would never say never, but I'm not looking to do that right now. Still, definitely not ready for that as of yet.
Sure.
Fair enough. We look forward to whatever you got planned, man. Definitely Lot of knowledge. I mean, man, I could talk to you for hours. It's so much to learn and to understand the process. And I think the thing I just want to say is like from game development, I know this is a kind of a subject on ILP that I wanted to mention that, there's so many nuances, there's so many things that go on behind the scenes that us as gamers are not privy to. And not that we can't have an opinion and not make an informed, make an opinion about what we think is happening. But at the same time, it's always good to get even more clarity and get more information as to process it. And it helps you understand and then try to hopefully isolate and focus on fixing those bigger issues that could get these games that we love. But
yeah, I mean, frankly, it's a miracle that any game ships. This is a difficult industry, and so I think the more that players can understand the complexities, I think the better. It's not that players shouldn't be criticizing the games that they're playing; they absolutely should be. But it's if you say something that's just frankly ridiculous, your criticism is basically being ignored. So if I can help people be able to complain about games for sure, but don't complain about it. Don't say pre-ordering makes people ship bad games, which is something that I've got a few comments on. It's like, that's not real. That doesn't work. That's not how this works. You have to think. I think the more we can provide players with the reality of what is actually happening, the more the criticisms can be legitimate and absolutely, like, this is an art form, but it's also a craft, and that's what we struggle with. Is we're making beautiful toasters, and you're simultaneously complaining about how good of a toaster is and the quality of the art on the side of it, and that's just a struggle we're gonna, I think, deal with for probably the next little while. I mean, I think we're gonna grow past that, and we'll all have good toasters, and then we'll just be talking about the art. But we're not there yet.
Fair enough. Maddie?
That's all I got. Cog, you're tapped out on questions?
Yeah, man. I mean, like I said, it's just very informative. The history, the lineage, where it comes from. And, I just love this stuff because, again, I try to have more of a nuanced opinion on things. For me, I'm very passionate. So sometimes, yes, I'm guilty of raging when it's something I love that doesn't, hit targets. But at the same time, once you get more additional information, you start to get a better picture. And this is great. This is great stuff.
I mean, it's painful, but, for someone that's led teams, the thing that people in the industry need to try to remember is, typically people only are mad about things that they love.
Preach.
If they don't care, they don't care. So if you're complaining, it's because you're wanting it to be better, and I do think that is very true.
No doubt.
Right on. Well, Mark, we thank you so much for not only your time, but your wisdom and all the tea you spilt. We appreciate that. But in all seriousness, thank you, Mark, for joining us, talking with us. Because I say this with a lot of our recent interviews. We had Graham Smith on, co-founder of Drinkbox Studios, and we just thank anyone who takes a chance on our show right now and kind of comes on, speaks to us, because we're going to keep reaching for bigger and bigger interviews. I'd argue you're definitely our biggest so far, Mark. So just thank you for taking the time to talk to Cog and I and share something about what is one of my favorite studios in video games in my lifetime. So it's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
With that, Mark, where can everyone find you if they want to hear more from you, more of that Mark wisdom? Where can they follow you? Maybe on Twitter? Go ahead and promote yourself by all means.
Yeah, so I am at Darrah on Twitter, because I can't change my name without losing my check mark. And I am on YouTube. I am old game dev advice. If you want a lot of what we just talked about, that's definitely a place to look.
Right on. Well, everyone give Mark's channel a look. I've certainly watched it. It's great. It's informative. And with that, Mark, thank you again so much for your time. To those of you who listened, thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you all next time with the next episode of Defining Duke Ultimate. Take great care of yourselves and peace out.
Defining Duke, an Xbox podcast, is a product and trademark of Last Stand Media and Collins Last Stand LLC, and is recorded from the United States of America. The show is conceived by Matthew Mr. Matty Plays Schroeder and me, Colin Moriarty, and is written and produced by Matthew Schroeder. Matty's co-host is Barry Lord Cognito Eversley. Defining Duke's executive producer is Dustin Furman, and the show is edited by associate producer Ben Smith. All of Last Stand's theme music is by Ramon Narvaez. As you know, all of Last Stand Media's shows, including Defining Duke, are fan-funded on Patreon at patreon.com/laststandmedia. The following names are at the producer support level on Patreon, and we're thankful for your kindness and generosity.